So, we're getting closer and closer to the release of Intravenous 2. And the closer we get to the release of the game, the more I realize that if you haven't played the first game yet, then if your plan is to play the second game first and then go back to the first one, then going back to playing the first one is going to be very, very difficult. And the reason for that is very simple. The second game is just so much better than the first one that the first one pales in comparison. And if you know me, I don't make shit up. I say things how they are, and this is how I genuinely feel, and this is the sentiment that I've shared ever since I've put a moderate amount of time into making the second game, and I saw like all the improvements that I've made to it, and saw basically like felt the game for what it is. So gameplay wise, it's way better. The narrative is also better. Story, that's subjective, I haven't talked about this anywhere, but the story in the second game is a metaphor for the feelings I was going through when my father was deathly ill with COVID shortly after I released the first game. So shortly after I released Intravenous 1 in August, he got sick with COVID really badly and had to be taken away, and he was away from us for like 2 or 3 months. I was hoping to finish up the game before he passed away so that to show it to him, but unfortunately, things don't always work out, and so on June 1st of 2023, so a year ago, he passed away from cancer, basically. So, like I said, story being better is subjective, but that's what the motivation for it is. So it comes from a very personal and honest place. Unlike the first game, which is like in the first game, I didn't even think, like, I didn't put any effort into the story. The story in the first game was, okay, I need a story that justifies the gameplay, so I'll just come up with the most basic stuff that explains the gameplay of why it's happening. Level design is better in the second game. Music is better, like way better. Sound is better in the second game. Every single facet that you can think of is better in the second game. Hell, even performance in some aspects is also better in the second game. And so Intravenous 2 is like the game that I wished Intravenous 1 would have been. So if I had the funding and the time back then to make Intravenous 1 the way I wanted it to be, Intravenous 2 is what it would be, more or less. But the thing is, even if I did have the money and the time back then, I would not have been able to make it that way simply because there are things that you learn as a game developer as you're making games. And so without Game Dev Studio, Intravenous 1, if I had decided to make it back then, if I even got the idea to make it back then, would have been a completely different game in terms of like just overall quality, if I had the money and time back then too. Because with the Intravenous 1, I used the code base from Game Dev Studio and built on top of it, right? And despite that, a lot of time that went into making Intravenous 1 was just making the engine, like making all the tools for actually making the game and like writing up all the code necessary for all the systems in the game. With the second game, that's a little bit different because in the second game, I took the code base of the first game and built on top of it again. But because most things were already in place, that meant I could spend more time working on levels and working on all the gameplay mechanics instead of just working on the engine, on the tech, right? There were still some things that I had to do for the second game to get it to work, to get all the features that I needed to have in there. But the amount of like engine and tech work compared to in the second game compared to the first one is just completely different thing. I spent way more time working on the game itself than on the engine side of things. However, despite that, even though it's been like 3 years since the first game launched, that doesn't mean that I spent all 3 years working on the game. 2022 and 2023 were very stressful and busy years, and I literally did not have as much time to work on the game as I would have liked, especially 2022. The second half of 2022 was a fucking nightmare to work on the game. But, that's life for you and there's nothing you can do. Aside from that, there are also things that you learn as a game developer, and when it comes to game design and things like that. So even if I had the time and money back then, I would not have been able to make Intravenous 1 as good as Intravenous 2 is. So if you plan on playing Intravenous 2, but you haven't played Intravenous 1, my suggestion would be to play Intravenous 1 first, buy it on Steam, or I don't know, get it some other way if you don't have the money. But like, if you plan on playing the second game, be sure to finish the first one first, because the second game is just so much better. If you play Intravenous 2 and then Intravenous 1, or if you play Intravenous 1 and then 2 and then go back to 1 again, it's just not going to be playable. Like, it just doesn't feel right. There are so many little things, and this is the thing about the Intravenous 2. A lot of changes are the little things under the hood that you don't see on screenshots, that you don't see like in static images, that you don't really see a lot on video either. But when you play, you feel them, and it makes a huge difference. My suggestion is just go play the first game if you haven't already, and then the second game will come out pretty soon. So I can't say when. All I can say is soon. Yeah, go friggin' play the first game, buy it. So that's about it. You should go play the first game if you haven't already. The demo for the second game will be available on June 10th this year, when the Steam Next Fest launches. So you'll be able to play the demo if you want to see all the changes compared to the first game. But even then, if you want to see the changes compared to the first game, you can just go ahead and play the prologue project, Intravenous 2 Mercenarism. I've uploaded an update just yesterday which implemented even more changes to bring it up to the level of the gameplay in the demo version. So if you want to see what Intravenous 2 has to offer, just go and play Mercenarism right now, or the demo version on the 10th. Tell your friends if you like the game. Wishlist that shit, that always helps. And I'll see you next time, I guess. Bye bye.